My family exploited me as free labor since age 10, while my lazy cousin was the golden child. I saved their failing business from bankruptcy. But when I discovered they still planned to make him CEO, I sold my 40% for a fortune and left them to collapse alone. I'm 34 years old. I work in digital marketing for a tech company, and honestly, I never thought I'd be writing this. But I need to get it out of my system, because what happened with my family's business basically consumed me for over 2 decades of my life. The thing is that my family owns a chain of barbecue restaurants. You know, one of those places with smoked ribs and the secret sauce that's supposedly my grandfather's original recipe from the 60 seconds. And all the drama I'm about to tell you revolves around that business and how they used me as free labor, while my cousin Noah, who literally never lifted a finger, was treated like he was the next Steve Jobs or something. Let me go back a bit so you understand the full context. My grandfather started this business in the 60 seconds, like one of those small family restaurants that somehow became successful, and by the time I was born, they already had like 3 or 4 locations. My dad and my uncle William, who is Noah's father, were the joint owners after my grandfather died when I was like 8 years old. I grew up hearing all these stories about the family legacy, about how my grandfather built everything from scratch, about the importance of keeping the business in the family. You know, all that stuff they drill into your head from when you're little to make you feel like you have this almost sacred responsibility to a rib joint. And here comes the part that still makes my blood boil when I think about it. I started working at the restaurant when I was 10 years old. 10 years old. Can you believe it? I'm not talking about going on weekends to help out for a bit and getting a tip. No, I'm talking about really working, after school, on weekends, during summer vacations. My dad would put me to work cleaning tables, washing dishes, helping in the kitchen, whatever was needed. And when I asked him about payment, he'd say, "This is a family business, Samuel. You don't pay family. You're learning, and someday all this will be yours too." And being a kid, I believed him, right? I thought I was building my future or something. Meanwhile, my cousin Noah, who is exactly my age because our moms were pregnant at the same time, which was always a point of competition between them, but that's another story, basically did nothing. He'd go to the restaurant occasionally, sit in the office with my uncle, supposedly learning about the business, but really just playing on his phone or computer. And the most incredible thing is that everyone treated him like he was a genius. Like the simple fact of sitting there doing nothing was some kind of executive training. My uncle would say things like, "Noah is learning the overall vision of the business. He's seeing the big picture. He doesn't need to get his hands dirty with operational details." Really? I was like 12 years old, scrubbing floors, and he was learning the overall vision, playing Candy Crush. This continued throughout my entire adolescence. My friends had part-time jobs and earned their money, could buy themselves things, go out, make plans, and I worked more hours than any of them but didn't see a single cent because it was family work. I tried to talk to my dad several times. I'd tell him, "Dad, all my friends earn money at their jobs. Why can't I at least earn something?" And he'd get all dramatic, tell me I was being selfish, that I didn't understand the value of family sacrifice, that my grandfather would roll over in his grave if he knew I wanted to get paid for helping with his legacy. He played the dead grandfather card constantly. It was his favorite manipulation weapon. And my mom was the same, or worse. She worked as a manager at one of the locations, and every time I complained, she'd come with the, "Oh, Samuel, don't be like that. Think about everything your dad and uncle have done for you. Think about the future you're building. Family is the most important thing." She used that emotional tactic all the time, making me feel like a horrible son for daring to question whether I deserved some kind of compensation for literally working like 20 hours a week on top of going to school. There came a point when I was like 16 that I started doing calculations in my head. If they had paid me even just minimum wage for all the hours I'd worked since I was 10, I'd have thousands of dollars saved. I could buy myself a car, I could pay for college, I could have some independence. But no. All that work evaporated into thin air. It was absorbed by the sacred family business, while Noah continued doing absolutely nothing, and everyone idolized him. When it came time to think about college, I was clear that I wanted to study marketing. I liked the idea of understanding how brands worked, how to attract customers, All that strategic part of the business that honestly my parents and uncle handled in a super outdated way. I thought that maybe if I studied something useful for the business, they'd see the value and support me. Huge mistake. My dad literally told me, "Why do you need to go to college? You already know how the business works. You've been here since you were a kid. What you need to learn, you already know." I told him I wanted to professionalize myself, that the world was changing and we needed to adapt. And he just laughed and said my grandfather's recipe had worked for decades and he didn't need some college professor telling him how to sell barbecue. So I told them I was going anyway, that I'd find a way to pay for it myself. And that's when things got really ugly. My dad gave me an ultimatum, told me that if I went to college, I was choosing to abandon the family, that I couldn't expect to continue being part of the business if I turned my back on them when they needed me most. My mom cried all the time, telling me I was killing her with my selfishness. How could I do this to them after everything they'd sacrificed for me? And I was thinking, sacrificed for me? What sacrifice are you talking about? If I've been the one working for free for 8 years? But I was 18, and finally had some decision-making power over my own life, so I left. I enrolled in State University, got 3 part-time jobs, worked at a Starbucks in the mornings before classes, tutored in the afternoons, and worked at a warehouse on weekends. It was exhausting. I'm not going to lie. There were nights where I slept like 4 hours because I had to study after working. But for the first time in my life, I felt like my effort was for me, that I was building something of my own and not being exploited for the benefit of others. During those years in college, my family basically gave me the cold shoulder. My dad wouldn't talk to me. My mom would call me every 2 weeks to cry and tell me I'd broken her heart. My Uncle William wouldn't even look at me when we coincided at family events. And the cherry on top was that Noah, my dear cousin who had never worked a single day in his life, was being groomed as the future CEO of the company. They sent him to an executive program, like one of those expensive weekend courses for entrepreneurs, where basically they give you a certificate for attending. And the whole family talked about how incredible he was, how he was prepared to take the business to the next level. I graduated at 22, got a job in digital marketing at a medium-sized company, and felt free for the first time in my life. I was earning my own money, making my own decisions, didn't have anyone manipulating me with the family legacy story. It was beautiful, honestly, and I thought I'd finally close that chapter of my life. But family never gives up, right? They started slowly. First, it was my mom calling me to invite me to family dinners. Then it was my dad casually mentioning that the business could benefit from my marketing knowledge. Then it was my uncle saying that maybe they'd been too hard on me and there would always be a place for me in the company. The pressure was constant, subtle at first, but increasingly intense. At family gatherings, everyone would talk about the business in front of me, mention problems that, according to them, I could easily solve, ask my opinion as if they valued my education. Basically, they were reeling me back in little by little. And I, like an idiot, started thinking that maybe things had changed. That maybe now that I had education and professional experience, they'd treat me differently, see me as an equal instead of as free labor. How naive I was. Seriously. At 26, after 3 years of constant emotional bombardment, I gave in and agreed to return to the business. They promised me it would be different, that I'd have a real role in marketing and development, that they'd pay me a competitive salary. It all sounded good in theory. The reality was a disaster from day one. I arrived with ideas to modernize the brand, create a social media presence, implement a digital loyalty program, optimize the menu based on Bergman and Teen State's sales data, and I hit a wall of resistance. My dad and uncle rejected every proposal, saying that's not how things were done, that I didn't understand the business like they did, that I was trying to fix something that wasn't broken. And meanwhile, Noah, who officially had the title of Director of Operations despite knowing absolutely nothing about operations, earned more than me and basically spent his days doing exactly what he'd always done. Nothing. I tried to implement at least small changes, basic things like updating the website that looked like it was from the 90s or creating a decent Instagram account, and even that was a battle. I needed approval for everything. They questioned every decision, made me feel like I was asking permission to breathe. And the worst part was seeing how with Noah, it was the complete opposite. He could suggest the most absurd things, like changing the entire restaurant design or modifying recipes that had worked for years, and everyone would nod and say, "What an innovative idea, Noah. You're a visionary." I put up with that shit for a year. A whole year trying to make changes while dealing with constant sabotage, while watching my work be minimized and Noah's non-existent contributions be celebrated. The breaking point was a meeting where I presented a complete digital marketing plan that had taken months to develop, with growth projections, competitive analysis, the whole professional package, and my Uncle William literally yawned in the middle of my presentation and said that all that sounded very nice, but at the end of the day, what mattered was food quality and customer service, which was what Noah understood perfectly. Noah, who couldn't distinguish between ROE and CEO, understood customer service perfectly. Sure. I quit that same week. I told them it had been a mistake to come back, that they clearly didn't value either my education or my experience, and that I was going back to my marketing career, where they did appreciate my work. My mom cried. Obviously, said I was abandoning her again, that I was a bad son, the usual drama. My dad got angry, told me I was making the biggest mistake of my life, that I was going to regret it. And I just left. Went back to my previous job, which fortunately still had a position available, and tried to move on with my life. The next few years were calmer. I kept my distance from my family, went to important events, but without getting involved in anything related to the business. I advanced in my career, gained valuable experience, had relationships, lived my life. I'd hear occasionally how the restaurant was doing, and honestly, they didn't seem to be growing much. They kept doing things exactly the same as always, but they weren't sinking either. So, I guess my dad and uncle's stubbornness was working, at least to maintain the status quo. Then 2020 came, and the pandemic basically destroyed their business model. Restaurants were forced to close or limit capacity, and they had absolutely no infrastructure for delivery or online ordering because they had rejected all my proposals years earlier to implement those systems. They had to close like 3 of their 8 locations, laid off a bunch of employees. It was a total disaster. And obviously, who do you think they called? Me. My dad called me, crying, literally crying, telling me they needed my help, that the business my grandfather built was crumbling, and that I was the only person who could save it. My uncle also called me, being more direct, basically admitting they'd been wrong not to listen to me years ago and that they were willing to give me total control if I came back. It was almost comical hearing them eat their words after years of treating me like I didn't know anything. Part of me wanted to tell them to go to hell, honestly. I wanted to tell them to have the pride to sink with their outdated ship instead of coming crawling to me after treating me like garbage. But another part of me, a stupid part that still cared about my grandfather's legacy and about the employees who were going to lose their jobs, felt like maybe this was my opportunity to finally do things right. And also, I'm not going to lie, there was a vengeful part that wanted to prove to them that I'd been right all along. So I negotiated. I told them I'd only come back if they gave me 40% ownership of the company and total operational control, without interference. They were so desperate they accepted. In 2021, I officially returned to the family business, but this time with real power and a significant stake that protected me from their manipulations. The first thing I did was fire Noah. Yes, you read that right. I fired my cousin, the golden child, the supposed future CEO. I told him his services were no longer needed, and he could leave with a generous severance if he left without making a scene. My Uncle William almost had a heart attack. My dad tried to defend him, saying Noah was an integral part of the team. But I had operational control in my contract, and I reminded them that either they respected that or they could look for someone else to save their business that was going down the drain. They shut up. The next 2 years were intense. I implemented everything I'd wanted to do years earlier and more. We created a functional online ordering platform, developed a mobile app, implemented a digital loyalty program, completely redesigned the brand while maintaining the essence but modernizing it, optimized the menu based on real sales and profit margin data analysis, trained staff in modern customer service, basically transformed the entire business while maintaining what really worked, which was the food quality. And it worked. During those 2 years, we pulled the business out of the hole, recovered profitability, even opened 2 new locations in strategic positions. I identified using demographic and market analysis. I worked harder in those 2 years than I'd worked in my entire life, arrived at 6 in the morning and left at 10 at night, was completely focused on making this work, both out of professional pride and to prove a point. But here comes the twist you probably already imagined. About a year ago, I overheard a conversation between my dad and my uncle by chance. They were in the office with the doors half open, and I was walking by when I heard my uncle say, "Now that Samuel fixed everything, we can start preparing Noah to take control as CEO. He has to learn from what Samuel did so he can continue his work." And my dad responded something like, "Yes, but we have to be careful. Samuel has 40% now, so we need to convince him that Noah is the best option to lead the next chapter of the business." I froze outside that office. After everything, after literally saving their business, after implementing everything they'd asked for, after proving exactly why they should have listened to me from the beginning, they still planned to put everything in Noah's hands. They hadn't learned anything, hadn't changed anything. They just used me again. This time, with a contract and stake included, to make it look legitimate. I didn't say anything at that moment. I went home and spent the whole night thinking. The next day, I called my lawyer and started the process of selling my stake in the business. Luckily, there was a clause that allowed me to sell my 40% under certain conditions, and after what I'd achieved the last 2 years, the value of my stake had increased significantly. I formally notified them of my intention to sell, and the surprise on their faces was almost comical. They thought I'd never leave, that they had control over me through the family legacy thing and all that emotional stuff they'd always used. My dad tried the same old speech. How could I do this to the family? That my grandfather would be disappointed. That after everything we'd achieved together, I was simply going to abandon ship. And for the first time in my life, I responded with the whole truth. I told him that he'd exploited me as free labor since I was 10 years old, that he'd never valued my education or experience, that he'd always favored Noah without any logical reason, and that I'd saved the business not because of him but in spite of him. I told him I didn't care about the legacy anymore, that grandfather was dead and couldn't have an opinion, and that I was finally going to do what was best for me, instead of sacrificing myself for people who clearly had never respected me. I sold my stake for a pretty large amount of money, considerably more than it had been worth when I received it thanks to all the work I did. My uncle and dad had to buy it because they didn't want any outside investor to have that percentage, so basically I squeezed all the possible value out of them. Noah returned immediately as director of operations, supposedly applying everything I'd implemented. That was about a year ago. Since then, I haven't returned to the business a single time. My relationship with my dad is practically non-existent. We talk maybe twice a year at unavoidable family events, and it's super awkward. My mom still tries to make me feel guilty, but it doesn't affect me like before. My uncle and Noah don't even speak to me, which honestly is a relief. And the business, well, I heard recently that they've had to close 2 more locations and that they're having problems with the online ordering platform because Noah decided to change providers to save costs, and now everything's a technical disaster. They also eliminated the loyalty program because according to Noah it was too complicated to maintain, and sales have dropped like 20% in the last year. I know all this because some of the old employees who still care about me keep me informed, not because I'm actively asking. Do I feel anything about it? Honestly, no. Maybe I should feel sadness or guilt or something about seeing what I built crumble. But the truth is, I feel peace. I finally understood that it wasn't my responsibility to save a business run by people who never valued me. It wasn't my job to sacrifice my life and emotional well-being for a legacy that in the end was just a manipulation tool. And it definitely wasn't my obligation to compensate for Noah's incompetence just because my dad and uncle never had the courage to admit their favorite was useless. Now I work at a tech company doing digital marketing, earn more money than I would have ever earned at the restaurant, have a much better life balance, and, for the first time, I don't feel like I owe anything to anyone. The money I got from selling my stake, I invested wisely and basically secured my financial future. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd been treated fairly from the beginning, if they'd paid me for my work as a kid, if they'd valued my education, if they'd given me the leadership I earned instead of automatically giving it to Noah, But those are unanswered questions, and they don't keep me up at night anymore, like before. The only thing I regret is the wasted time. All those years feeling guilty for wanting something better for myself, all those years letting them manipulate me emotionally, all those years believing that family love meant sacrificing my dignity and my worth. But I guess even that was a valuable lesson. Now I know exactly what kind of relationships I want in my life and which ones I'm never going to tolerate again, regardless of whether they're family or not. Last week, my mom called to tell me my dad is considering selling the entire business because he can't manage it without me anymore, and Noah clearly can't do it alone. She wanted to know if I'd be interested in buying it, basically coming back and rescuing them again. I told her no, that chapter of my life was permanently closed. She cried a bit, told me she'd never forgive me if I let my grandfather's legacy die, and I simply told her that my grandfather had been dead for almost 30 years, and that maybe it was time for everyone to stop using him as an excuse for their own decisions and manipulations. I hung up the phone and felt free, completely free. And that, I guess, is the only thing that really matters at the end of the day.